Hello, everybody. Here I am again with another screencast for you to help with your understanding of Brave New World, chapter 6 and 7. Thank you for the feedback that you gave last week in the Google form indicating that this was helpful. So it inspired me to create another one of these so that hopefully we can keep the understanding of the novel that we're reading improving and improving and improving. So, welcome. And I hope you're doing well. I hope that you got out this weekend and you did something fun, at least, in nature or something like that. And I hope you'll continue to reach out and let me know if things are going well or what else we need to do to make sure that you're understanding everything and doing well, because this is the last week of the quarter. So here goes. Let's talk about chapter 6 and 7 of Brave New World. We learned quite a bit about Bernard in particular in these couple chapters, as well as Lenina, his love interest. So just to recap real quick, though, before we get into that, you're going to be opening up in the classwork tab the chapter 6 to 7 work along note sheet. This is just a quick little version of it. You can see right here on the screen. And you're going to complete those 5 different prompts. 5. As you are either listening to the screencast or after you listen to the screencast to confirm that you're understanding well. Okay, so hopefully you did your muddiest point earlier to start, and we'll be responding to those throughout the day. So hopefully people will post some good questions and thought-provoking ideas there. Then you'll do the work along sheet, and that will be the majority of what you need to do for today. So back to the notes. So let's talk about chapter 6 of the text, because this is when Bernard and Lenina go on their date. So a couple of you on the Socratic quiz made the mistake of thinking about Henry and Lenina's date to Westminster Abbey Cabaret, as opposed to Bernard and Lenina's date when they go ultimately to Amsterdam. So those can get a little confusing. So just make sure we're on the same page literally here. We're talking about chapter 6, the part 1 where Bernard and Lenina go on their date. So something to think about is how compatible are they really? We know Bernard's very interested in her. We know she actually finds him interesting in that, not that he's revolutionary or anything like that. She says he's odd on page 1 of chapter 6, in fact. But she says he has really nice hands. So there's like the physical attraction there on Lenina's part to Bernard, even though he's stunted, even though he's different, even though he's an outcast. She's interested in him physically. And so she pursues this date. Remember, she's got an objective too, which is to prove that she's not simply monogamous with Henry. So she, of all people, chooses Bernard to do this with. But that's her choice. So we're going with it. And they go out on their date. Now, during their date, Bernard would prefer to take a walk in the heather, to go out into nature, to talk, to get to know her, to be alone with her. And the whole date, if you didn't really kind of see it this way, is sort of a back and forth war of attrition that Bernard is facing, in that every time he suggests they do something that's a little bit different, Lenina, with her conditioning or in her efforts to look like she's so normal, quote unquote, keeps pushing him back the other way. So Bernard fails to fend off the conditioning, shaping their choices. He wants to go walking. She says, no, no, no. On 91 is when he proposes that they actually do something different, or a little bit before that, actually. And then they end up going over to Amsterdam, which still today is known for some lascivious behavior. They watch the semi-demi-finals of the Women's Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. And they're in a crowd. They're full of, surrounded by people. No social distancing here. There's tons of people around. They're all taking soma. They're watching this wrestling championship. And the entire time, Bernard is gloomy. He is not having fun. He is not enjoying himself whatsoever. And so when they finally get back into the helicopter to fly back to London from Amsterdam, Bernard tries to explain to Lenina just why he is not happy. Her course, she does not understand. She says, a gram is better than a dam, which is one of the hypnopedic slogans that they have conditioned into their brains. So just take a gram of soma. Don't be gloomy, is the idea. But Bernard is flying the helicopter and he's trying to make her appreciate nature. He's trying to make her see the power of his thinking. And so if you've never studied geography, the English Channel is a rocky body of water that separates, France and England. And they're flying over this piece of water when he turns off the radio and tells her to look at the moon, look at the waves, look at everything. On page 90. Lenina, though, reacts on 91, but Lenina was crying. I'm reading from my book. But Lenina was crying. It's horrible. It's horrible, she kept repeating. And how can you talk about life like that, about not wanting to be part of the social body? After all, everyone works for everyone else. We can't do without anyone, even epsilons. Yeah, I know, said Bernard derisively. Even epsilons are useful. So am I, and I damn well wish I weren't. Lenina was shocked by his blasphemy. Bernard, she protested in a voice of amazed distress. How can you? In a different key, how can I? He repeated meditatively. No, the real problem is, how is it that I can't? Or rather, because after all, I know quite well why I can't. What would it be like if I could? If I were free, not enslaved by my conditioning? But Bernard, you're saying the most awful things. Don't you wish you were free, Lenina? I don't know what you mean. I am free to have the most wonderful time. Everybody's happy nowadays. Yeah, he laughed. Everybody's happy nowadays. We've been giving that one to children since they were 5. But wouldn't you like to be free to be happy in some other way, Lenina? In your own way, for example, not in everybody else's way. I don't know what you mean. And this exchange will go on like this until finally Bernard gives up, reaches over, fondles her chest, takes her home, takes Soma, and they sleep together. And Bernard is greatly disappointed in himself when he does this. So a question to ponder, might the date have gone differently without that Soma? Lenina, might she have received that message a little differently without that Soma blasting her brain? Is Lenina as a beta also operating at a disadvantage? I mean, intellectually, is it harder for her to understand concepts like freedom than Bernard, who's an alpha psychologist? These are things to think about as we move forward. If this couple continues to be a focus, are they compatible? What's interesting about their relationship? What kinds of things are you pinging on as you're looking at them interact with each other? Look at the picture on the slide here. It sort of captures in a anime kind of way the disconnect that's happening between these two in chapter 6, part 1. But wasn't it fun? Lenina says. No, it wasn't fun for Bernard. All right, let's move on. So let's go to part 2 of chapter 6. This chapter should take exactly like 10 lines because the only plot that happens or should happen in this exchange is, hello, director, I'm Bernard. I need you to sign this paperwork so that I can go to the Savage Reservation. Thank you very much for your signature. Have a good day. But the exchange does not go down this way. And I hope you notice that this exchange between the director and Bernard actually turns into a little bit of a thing, in that the director, rather than just signing the paperwork, starts to talk about a memory. Now remember, the Brave New World ethos is to stay in the present, to only think of the now and what you're about to do and how much fun you can have, and never ever think about yesterday because who cares, and who cares about tomorrow, and let's just worry about right now. But the director relates a highly inappropriate story about how he went to the Savage Reservation. And he has some trauma from it. in that he lost, doesn't know what happened to the woman with whom he traveled to this reservation. And as he's telling this story, Bernard is like, yes, 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 yes. So my question for you is why? Why is Bernard so jazzed about the director telling him about this experience he had at the Savage Reservation? Did you take time to think about that? Like, what is it about that that's so different? This is the director of the Hatchery and Conditioning Center. And this man, who is supposed to be the picture of orthodox behavior, is now relating this inappropriate story basically about missing this woman. This woman that he went to the reservation with, that he never heard from again, that he wonders what happened to her. Why would he wonder? You're not supposed to care about anybody in the Brave New World. You're supposed to worry about yourself, and that's it. But here, this director makes this mistake. And I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, but the best defense sometimes is a good offense. So, what is the director going to do? As soon as he realizes not only that he has misstepped and he has shared an inappropriate story with Bernard, but also that Bernard has enjoyed it that much, the director decides to go on the offensive. Best defense is the good offense. And so he threatens Bernard. He's like, you, by the way, Marx, if I hear any more nasty stories about you and your unorthodox behavior, that's going to be it. And so he puts Bernard on his back feet. So he's trying to not defend himself, but he changes the subject by putting it all on Bernard. And so there's some threat here for unorthodox behavior. There's a threat that he could be sent away for his bad behavior. The director, who's been dreaming about this woman, says, I really don't know, on page 97, I really don't know why I bored you with this trivial anecdote. So he's trying to downplay it, right? Oh, it's nothing. Who cares? I mean, why am I even talking about this? Furious with himself for having given away a discreditable secret, the director vented his rage at Bernard. The look in his eyes was now frankly malignant. And I should like to take this opportunity, Mr. Marx, of saying that I'm not at all pleased with the reports I receive of your behavior outside working hours. You may say that this is not my business, but it is. I have the good name of the center to think of. My workers must be above suspicion, particularly those of the highest caste. Alphas are so conditioned that they do not have to be infantile in their emotional behavior, but that is all the more reason for their making a special effort to conform. It is their duty to be infantile, even against their inclination. And so, Mr. Marx, I give you fair warning. This is a setup. Just remember this scene. This is an important setup. The fact that this director has lost this woman, okay, down in the reservation. And of course, he'll meet with Helmholtz afterwards and be like, oh, I was so awesome. Bernard, I don't know. Sometimes Bernard, are you getting a vibe on Bernard not being quite always, I don't know, kind, cool, interesting, in that he kind of, I don't know, he can be a little weasel sometimes. All right, part 3, right? Here we go. We're off to the Savage Reservation. So remember, Huxley is a Brit, and sometimes the Brits like to make fun of Americans. And so where does he put the savages? Where do all the savages live in the utopian world of the world state? They live in America. Of course they do. They live in America. They live in New Mexico. And so when we travel in the third part of chapter 6, and then we're there in chapter 7 getting a tour, yet another tour, like we got a tour of the hatchery, we learn that there is this place called the Savage Reservation. And the people there are very different than the people in the utopia. And Lenina is looking around and she is horrified. She's horrified. So my question is, she's pretty open about it. Is Bernard horrified? Think about this. Is he horrified? I mean, he's pointing things out like, oh, look at that guy, Lenina. Or, oh, Lenina, look at that lady breastfeeding her child. Wouldn't you like to be a mother someday? I mean, he's trying to push her buttons a little bit and see how she's going to react. But I think he's kind of freaked out too. He's just playing it way cooler than she is. He also has a distracting thought on his mind. And I don't know if you've ever done this when you've gone on a trip, like you've driven away from the house and you're like, oh no, did we close the garage door? Or, oh no, did I unplug the iron? Or, any of those kind of thoughts. Bernard is thinking, oh my gosh, I left my scent tap on. So they have all these little taps in their bathroom. This one is a scent tap that blows like cologne at you. Remember, they're obsessed with cleanliness and hygiene. And so the entire time that the warden is giving the tour at the end of chapter 6, he's thinking, oh my God, I got to call him. I got to call him. He's got to go to my apartment. He's got to check this out for me. It's going to cost me a fortune. And so Bernard's a little bit distracted in the chapter 6 part of the tour, but in 7, he's really pushing Lenina's buttons. And when Lenina sees the ceremony, the savage ceremony, which is a very primitive ceremony meant to bring rain, they're doing this corn ceremony, and they actually whip people and bleed into the ground thinking it will make the corn grow. I mean, really ancient native rituals here going on that they would have never ever seen in the world state, in the utopia. And Lenina, the only thing she can connect to is the drums of the powwow that they're having. They're familiar to her. It reminds her of like the drums at the solidarity ceremony. And so she does get into that a little bit in chapter 7. But for the most part, it's an alien space. So here you have, on one hand, the Brave New World, the world state, where there is an emphasis on everyone having everything they need: material goods, wealth, comfort, cleanliness, no disease. Yet we have no parents, we have no relationships, we have no God, we have no reading, we have no anything like that we maybe would find a little more familiar. On the other hand, now, here's my other hand on the camera. Here it is. We have the reservation. It's primitive. There's no running water. There's no sanitation. There's disease. People are starving, right? They need the corn ceremony to grow. They're starving. People are sick. People are alcoholic. People are a mess. But they do have thoughts of God and Jesus and Pukong, and they mention all of these different native gods, and they have some sense of God in general. And so one of the things I'm going to challenge you to do is to think about in a Venn diagram kind of way on the work along. It's not circles. You're going to have to forgive me. I just used squares. But think of ways, at least 5, that the Savage Reservation is unique or different from the world state. Then think of 5 ways that the world state is unique from the Savage Reservation. And then this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the thinking is. Do these 2 very different places have anything in common? And if so, what is it? That would go in the middle column of the organizer, that it's in part of the work along. What do they have in common? I mean, some things that are still, because they're human, would be common, like death. But that's a freebie. But what else might they have in common? Think about that. See if you can come up with anything. I'm really curious to see your thinking there. And if you can't, that might be something to post in your muddiest point and get a little extra help from a friend. You know what I'm saying? All right. So we meet a new character. His name is John the Savage. He's actually referred to as John the Savage. Now, the problem is we're in New Mexico, where everyone has dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin for the most part. And here we go. We meet this guy from the Savage Reservation, and he's blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And he speaks proper English. Different. Where's this kid coming from? Blonde hair, blue eyes, proper English. He is desperate to be part of the ceremony. He's like, pick me, please let me be part of the ceremony. Please let me be part of the ceremony. I am ready to sacrifice. I am ready to show myself a man and do this for my community. but he's an outcast. They're like, no, we don't want you. Why would we want you to do this? He's treated like a freak. Remind you of anyone? His mother is Linda, and we meet her in a kind of comic way. She comes bounding towards Lenina, and Lenina's like, oh my gosh, get her away from me. And Linda is so excited to see people that look like she used to look like. Lenina is just a sight for sore eyes for Linda, right? She cannot get enough. She's like, oh, I remember the clothes. I remember the perfumes. Oh, I remember. And what Bernard does is he will put 2 and 2 together. And he will figure it out pretty quickly. That this John the Savage was born to Linda, who is the woman that the director left behind some 20 years ago. So figure it out, friends. Figure it out. Who is the father of John the Savage? John the Savage, namesake, just like we have other namesakes, Bernard Marx for Karl Marx. John the Baptist is John the Savage's namesake. So in the slides, you'll be able to click on John the Baptist, that link, and find out a little bit about him if you don't know about that figure from scripture. It is an interesting point of comparison that we'll figure out as we continue to read about John the Savage. And the last thing that really needs to be mentioned with John is that he loves to read Shakespeare. So we have a savage who loves to read Shakespeare. And he has this like mouse-eaten copy of all of Shakespeare's works. And so sometimes, I hope you noticed this. This was kind of fun. He speaks in Shakespeare. So I know, English teacher nerd thing. I know. But he speaks lines from Macbeth or Hamlet or Othello or Romeo and Juliet. And you're going to see that as we continue to read about John the Savage. So keep that in mind. Your homework, I know it's all homework right now, but your assignment before next class is going to be to read chapter 8. And you're going to find out a lot more about John and his story and his experience living in the Savage Reservation as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, quote-unquote freak. And so I look forward to those responses too. So there's one more thing I need you to do, and that is to do a power write. You're going to do this right on your work along notes. But this is where I want you to think for a minute. Really think for a minute. And think about chapter 6 and 7 and all we've learned about Bernard and all we've learned about Lenina and this new character. But also think about why on earth would Huxley take us to this savage reservation? Why has he created 2 different worlds for us to compare? How might this play into his ultimate goal to create a satire that comments on something like science or technology or religion? All of those types of things are in play. So I ask you to write, just take a few minutes, 60-second power write, 120-second power write. What might Huxley be trying to convey by showing us these 2 different worlds? Right? We have one that's ultra clean and ultra hygienic and ultra stable, but without freedom or without any sort of spirituality. Then you have the other reservation where you have disease and you have suffering and you have starvation and you are literally locked in there. That can't be overlooked. You're imprisoned there. But you also have certain freedoms that are not allowed. You have family, you have parents, you have love interests, you can get married. So what is he doing? What is Huxley doing? I'm curious to see your responses on that. All right. So some good chapters to really talk about. So I hope this helped you out. If it didn't, you're going to let me know. You're going to post some good questions in the muddiest point. You're going to submit your notes so that I'll be able to see where your thinking is on that. And you're going to make sure you're just reaching out to say hi.